Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're continuing our series of shirim of the Vilna Gaon 70 Kolchos, 70 aspects of the self, through and illuminated by the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh and the other tzaddikim. Now, everything about what the Gra is teaching us is reflective of the principle that the part and the whole are representative of one another, something that we draw completely and directly out of the teachings of the Arizal, the Rashash, the Taras Chacham, and the Leshem, as we've seen so clearly. But the Yishuv and the Shiluv between the part and the whole teaches us that whatever I see in the whole, I can find in the part, and whatever I find in the part, I can see in the whole. And just as the human being can reflect on their inner experiences and translate them outside onto the external world to now orient oneself to others and to the world by way of my own inner experience, so too I can allow the external framework of reality to give me categories through which I can look at the self. A classic example of this is going to be the four foundational elements that our Rishonim, our Anachronim also point out that are the four foundational elements at the heart of all of existence. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar, that there's going to be fire, there's going to be air, there's going to be water, and there's going to be dust. The Shari Kedusha, Rav Chaim Vital already makes clear that these are elements within the self, and these are principles of the self. And the Balatanya in the second parak describes these as being oriented to the Klipas Noga, to the element of the Nefesh Bahamis, and the four ways in which the human mind can kind of get itself stuck in this world. Mayim represents Tainug, the desire to experience pleasures beyond that which is essential. Ruach represents Hailulus, and making oneself bigger and haughtier and larger, and imagining oneself to be something that they are not. Upper is going to be the heaviness and the listlessness of being dragged down to the ground with that gravitational force of that depressive tendency, not depression, God forbid, but the depressive tendency. And then you're going to have Aish, which is going to be the tendency towards anger and a deep expression of intensification of self. Now, these four qualities, the Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar, become the next four kochos hanefesh, which will bring us to seven kochos hanefesh after the he'eder koidem hametzias, after the hiyuli, and after the tzura rishona. Here we are now allowing the tzura rishona, the way in which we formulate our subjective personality, to now be expressed through these four lenses, through these four particular frameworks in which I can perceive existence. Because at any given point, I can orient myself from an avir perspective, from an air perspective, from a ruach perspective, which all of the halachos that come along with that. And another point, I can associate myself with mayim or aish or afar. So, for example, when I am trying to be present without overstating myself, when I am trying to minimize myself, when I'm trying to negate my selfhood so that I can be present in humility, so I'm orienting myself towards an afar, nafshi ka afar l'chol. I'm not responding. I'm learning how to feel okay within myself. Nafshi l'afar l'chol, that I have everything within me. I don't need to respond. That's the koich of afar. In Aish is where I take something apart. How do I take this apart to understand its composite form so that I can then better understand it? Just as Aish takes a piece of paper that was singularly unified and it breaks it down into innumerable pieces, the work of fire, of Gevura, is to take something apart, to deconstruct it so that I can better understand the parts of it and then put it back together and see the thing in a grander perspective. If I'm seeing something of a perspective of Mayim, it's where's the Tainug inherent in this? How can I share this? How can I extend this beyond its original source? Mayim seeks to connect, like water that takes the granulated forms of flour and allows them to connect into a dough. It's a unifying principle. Davek Hamayim, that the Mayim seeks unification with existence. And the avir, the ruach, is where I'm going to try and soften the intensity with which I look at the world. I'm going to try and slacken my grip on how intensely I take everything. It's going to be a question of how I am mitmoded with the world. And when we begin to form our tzura, when we begin to form the framework in which we're going to look, so the first midah, the midah dalit, is going to be avir, the possibility of breath. Now, the Gra points out in his bir and Bava that avir is different than all of the other kochos because it's nechsav shalim, that it's not lacking anything. Water can be deficient, fire can be extinguished, the afar can be ruined, but the air is always going to be there unless there's something that is standing in the way of it being present. That air brings to mind the sense of wholeness that a person has. And what we know from Rabbi Nachman is that the nature of breath, the nature of air, is to come to terms with the floating nature of self, with the transiency of all things, with the hevel havalim, with the recognition that in the end of the day, people float, we fly through this world, we function in a way where the less we take things seriously, the lighter we become, and the lighter we become, the more we can elevate ourselves and untether ourselves from the stuckness in this worldliness, and we can uncover the gadfei haruach, the wings of the nefesh. Wings imply a certain element of utilizing air, of breath, of inhaling and exhaling, of allowing life to be cut through with the deep breath of oxygen, with the recognition that there's an avira dachya, there's a purified air, there's a rarefied air that all of existence is rooted in. And in truth, as the Emek HaMelech points out, the entire purpose of human being in this world is to be like air that can become polluted, but then it can be returned back to its original state. And our job as human beings is to remember that purified air that exists within us, the columns of air that operate within the mind. And when I take a deep breath, I'm drawing down upon that avir of the world, the ability to take things a little bit lighter, to laugh at myself, to laugh with the world, to laugh like a Kadosh Baruch Hu will laugh Kaviyachol with the Lavyasan when the air opens up the tzimtzum. There's a tzimtzum, there's a constriction and a he'eder and lack and the Meitzar Yam, the inability to breathe and the Koitzer Ruach and all of these tendencies of frustration and anger and resentment. All of them come about when I am gripping too hard at life. The avir allows me to air out my fingers, as the Baal Tanya says in the name of Chazal, that a tefach oitzev and a tefach soichik, two ways of measuring a particular measurement, that a tefach oitzev is going to be measured when the fingers are not separated, when there's no separation between the fingers. But a tefach soichik, a laughing tefach, is going to be one that's measured with the space, the gapping, the spacing in between the fingers, because that spacing allows for the air to come in. It's the revach ben hadvekim. It's the opposite of a parsha stuma. It's a place to breathe. It's a place to draw down the air of Gan Eden, as Rabbi Nachman teaches over and over and over, that to breathe is to draw down shleimus hachesronos, like the Gra is pointing out. That in breath, as long as I learn to tame my breath, I don't need anything external to enable me to breathe properly. Other elements of myself, I need something external, but the avir is perpetually moving through me because we're nothing but the avir, the ruach memala of HaKadosh Baruch Hu kavyachol, and we know that man de nafach misoiche nafach, that the one who breathes from the innermost place within themselves, that ruach chayim. So we are nothing but the breath of HaKadosh Baruch Hu kavyachol that is breathing itself through existence, through the empty vessels of that Surah Rishona, which is simply an expression of the infinite possibilities of the Hiyuli, which is revelatory of Hashem Yimloch Lo'elam Va'ed, which is rooted in bringing us back to that place of He'eder Kodim HaMetzias, that the first expression of that Surah in its first form is going to be breath, it's going to be air. Like Rabbi Nachman said, that when you leave from here and they ask you, what did you gain here? It took a lot to be by Rabbeinu. It took a lot to be by Rabbi Nachman. Tell them that you learned how to breathe. To breathe is to operate back into that world of the Tzura Rishona, of the Poishet Tzura, Velovesh Tzura, of the Mati Veloy Mati. Breath is inhaling and exhaling. And in truth, it's specifically in the inability to grasp exactly where we hold ourselves, but to float in the air, to live in that mindset of Banalan Besa Ba'avir Da'alma, when Greece comes to Yerushalayim and says, build for me a house in the center of the sky. Only the Yiddish neshama that's rooted in that Avira Dachi, of the Tehirui law, of that purified, rarefied air that comes down from the highest, loftiest places imaginable to irrigate the kanfei reya and the lungs themselves that allow the heart to continue to beat without being overwhelmed by the burning desire to run closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Tikkunei Zohar says, that the breath is what waves, it's what allows the movement of the soul to kind of take on shape. To breathe is to allow myself to be present, to inhale and to count, to breathe through the nose, to ground myself, to minimize and to sweeten the anger and the tendency towards hopelessness at its core, and to live with that avira dachyo, to live with that purified air, to live in anticipation of that avira dachya de Mashiach, that purified air of Mashiach, of that ruach hapina Mashiach Hashem. And when a yid recognizes that there's an avir, there's an air, there's a breath of HaKadosh Baruch Hu kavyachol that animates the world, that animates the self, at that point I can now direct all of my further experiences, whether they be by way of water, which is a connection, whether they be by way of fire, which is separation, whether they be by way of afar, which is a state of being, and then all of the unfolding kochos afterwards. Avir, the breath, is what must always be present there. There needs to be spacing. There needs to be not taking it all too seriously, because to take it all too seriously, to tighten our grip over and over, is to perpetually lose sight of the goal, because the goal is to reduce our grip, to own without owning, to hold without holding, to have Kayin and Hevel dancing together. And in that way, we can be Zoicha to the deep breath of Mashiach Tzidkenu, and we could be Zoicha to the breath of Mashiach ben David, which is the Ruach Nishbera, which is the Ruach of Tshuva, and we can have the breath of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is the Ruach of Hatzlacha, which is the Ruach of winning, and then the unification of the breath of winning and losing gives birth to the unity of Moshe Rabbeinu's breath, which is the breath that's willing to breathe through the shortness of breath, the ability to calm down the breath, even when I feel that I'm losing my breath. And at that place in the avir of the soul, we begin to open ourselves up to the beginning and the future unfolding of the self, Be'ezras Hashem.